Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone.
About 18 years ago, I spent a lot of time alone in a house in the middle of rural Alabama. My father worked several jobs because he was trying to pay off debts my stepmother had created. He was rarely home for long. My stepmother would disappear on drinking and drug binges, sometimes leaving without saying when she would return. Often, the only people in the house were me and my brother. We also had our dog, a large Rottweiler who made the isolation easier to handle. The nearest neighboring house was about half a mile away. The property was surrounded by woods, fields, and long stretches of darkness. At night, there were no nearby porch lights or passing pedestrians. If someone approached the house, they had to make a deliberate effort to get there. My father owned several firearms, and nearly everyone in the house had been taught how to use them. People in the area knew he was heavily armed, so I grew up believing that nobody would be foolish enough to break into our home. That belief made me feel safer. At least it did for a while. The strange experiences began with small movements at the edge of my vision. I would be sitting in a room and notice something pass through a doorway. When I turned to look, nothing was there. Sometimes a dark shape seemed to move along a wall. Other times I felt as though someone had crossed behind me. The movement was always quick and unclear. I never saw a face or a complete figure. It happened in the part of my vision where details were weakest, so I could easily convince myself that I had imagined it. I told my brother a few times. Instead of taking me seriously, he used it as another opportunity to frighten me. He would hide around corners, make sounds in other rooms, or suggest that something was watching me. That only made me more nervous. Still, I tried to remain rational. I suspected there might be something wrong with my eyesight. I needed glasses, although I never received a proper eye examination at the time. Poor vision, eye strain, or even small floating spots in the eye can create movement where there is none. Peripheral vision is especially unreliable. It notices motion quickly, but the brain has to guess what caused it. A curtain shifting can become a person. A shadow from a tree can seem to walk. An insect close to the eye can look like something moving across the far side of a room. I accepted that explanation because it was easier than believing there was someone inside the house. For about a year, the movements continued. Then, they seemed to become more distinct. I no longer saw only brief flickers. I began seeing shadows that appeared to travel independently of the people and objects around them. I would notice something dark cross an open doorway, even though nobody else was home. A shadow might move against the direction of the light or disappear when I looked directly at it. But how do you explain that to someone? How do you say that the shadows in your house are moving? There was always an ordinary possibility. A car passed outside. A cloud crossed the sun. The television changed scenes. A branch moved against the window. My tired eyes made a mistake. I did my best to ignore it. There were also serious things happening in my life at the time. My stepmother's behavior had become increasingly unstable, and I was being homeschooled because of the chaos around us. I spent long periods isolated from people outside the family. The house was not simply a place where I lived. It was a place where I waited. I waited for my father to return from work. I waited to find out whether my stepmother was coming home sober, intoxicated, angry, or not at all. I waited for my brother to come back from wherever he had gone. I was constantly listening for cars, doors, footsteps, and changes in the mood of the people around me. Even now, I wonder whether my mind created the shadows, because it needed a monster that was easier to understand than the real danger in the house. A shadow has no complicated explanation. It is either there or it is not. A frightened child living with an unstable adult has to deal with something much more confusing. The person who should protect you may also be the source of fear. You never know what version of them will return. Perhaps my mind gave that fear a shape. Maybe the dark movements were hypervigilance. When someone lives under chronic stress, the nervous system can remain prepared for danger even when nothing is happening. A small sound or movement can trigger the same response as a real threat. You look toward every doorway. You notice every change in light. You expect someone to appear. Eventually, the brain may start finding people in shadows because it believes that missing a threat would be worse than seeing one that is not there. That explanation makes sense to me now. At the time, I only knew that the house felt less empty than it was supposed to. The final incident happened on a night when everyone except me and the dog was gone. My father was working out of state. My stepmother had disappeared again, which was frightening in one way, but also a relief because I did not have to deal with her behavior. My brother was out, as he often was. That left me alone in the house with a Rottweiler. I trusted that dog completely. He had already protected me during an attempted break-in. On another occasion, he had defended me from a pack of aggressive dogs. He was large, alert, and fearless when he believed I was in danger. As long as he was close, I felt that nothing could enter the house without him reacting. Before it became dark, I followed the routine I had developed whenever I was alone. I checked the doors and locked them. I closed every curtain. I switched on lights throughout the house. I turned on televisions in different rooms to create noise and make it seem as though several people were home. I did not want anyone outside to see a dark, silent house and realize there was only one person inside. It was not a perfect security system, but it made me feel less exposed. I also took one of my father's handguns and placed it on the table in front of me. Looking back, I understand how dangerous that was. I was frightened, alone, and holding a weapon, while already expecting something to happen. That combination could easily have ended with someone being seriously injured. At the time, however, I believed the gun was another layer of protection. The dog would warn me. The locked doors would slow anyone down. The lights and televisions would discourage them. And if all of that failed, I had the handgun. I sat in the living room watching television. It was close to midnight, and Adult Swim was playing. The strange programs and late-night advertisements created their own kind of atmosphere, but I kept the volume on because silence was worse. The living room felt like the safest part of the house. I could see the entrances. The dog was nearby. The back door was behind or near me, but I knew the curtain covering its window was closed. I had checked it myself. At some point, I noticed that something in the room looked different. The curtain over the back door was open. The light near that part of the house was off. I stared at it, trying to understand how either thing had changed. I knew I had closed the curtain. I was certain I had turned on every light. Perhaps the curtain had slipped. Maybe the light bulb had burned out. A switch could have been loose. I might even have forgotten that one area while going through the house. But the sight immediately made me feel that I was no longer alone. I reached for the handgun. Then I noticed the smell. It was sudden and terrible. The dog had urinated and defecated on the floor. He had never reacted that way around me before. This was the same dog who had faced an intruder and a pack of dogs. Now he was terrified. He turned and ran away from the living room. He went toward my bedroom and left me standing there near the back door. That frightened me more than the open curtain. Dogs can hear and smell things that people cannot. If he was afraid enough to lose control of his body and flee, I believed something had to be there. Before he ran, he had been looking toward the back door. I turned in the same direction. There was a figure outside. It looked as though it was made entirely from shadow. A light from behind or beyond it outlined part of the shape, but I could not see a face, clothing, or skin. It appeared solid enough to block the light. It seemed human in height and general form, yet there was no detail within it. I did not see eyes. I did not see hands. I could not tell whether it was facing me, although I felt as though it was looking into the house. For a moment, I froze. All the shadow movements I had ignored over the previous year seemed to have led to this. They had remained at the edge of my vision before. Now, one stood directly outside the back door. I raised the gun and fired 3 times. The shots were deafening inside the house. 2 bullets struck the doorframe. The third went through the back window, breaking the glass and traveling outside. The figure did not fall. I did not hear a person cry out. I saw no blood. There was no visible reaction that I could clearly remember. The shape was either gone, hidden by the broken glass and darkness, or never physically there in the first place. I did not stay to find out. I ran to my bedroom. The dog was already there. I shut myself inside with him and waited. After the gunshots, nothing entered the house. No one tried the door. There were no footsteps across the broken glass. No voice called from outside. The dog remained frightened, but the house eventually became quiet again. I do not know how long I stayed in the room. I probably expected police, neighbors, or my family to appear after hearing the shots. But the property was isolated enough that nobody came immediately. The nearest house was far away, and the television noise may have covered some of the sound outside. Eventually, my father returned. I told him everything. I described the open curtain, the dark light, the dog's reaction, the figure outside, and the shots. He believed I had probably seen another burglar. That was the most practical explanation. Someone may have approached the back door, expecting the house to be empty. Perhaps they had opened or disturbed the curtain somehow. The dog detected them first and became frightened. When I fired, the person ran before I could see where they went. My father said I had likely missed. Considering where the bullets struck, he was probably right. 2 rounds hit the frame, and only 1 passed outside. In darkness and panic, I had not aimed accurately. He did not treat the event as evidence of anything supernatural. He said we would clean up the dog's mess, repair the door and window, and deal with the damage together. Part of me was relieved by his explanation. A burglar was frightening, but it was understandable. A person could approach the house and run after gunfire. A person could wear dark clothing and become a silhouette against an outdoor light. The absence of blood or injury did not mean no one had been there. It could simply mean I missed all 3 shots. But no clear evidence of an intruder was found outside. There was no blood trail. No injured person appeared at a hospital or contacted police, as far as I knew. There were no obvious footprints, dropped tools, damaged locks, or signs that someone had tried to enter. The curtain and light remained difficult to explain. If a burglar stood outside the glass, how had the curtain opened from inside? It may not have. I could have closed it poorly, allowing it to slide or fall open. The dog might have brushed against it earlier. Air from a vent could have moved it. The light may have burned out at the exact wrong moment. Several ordinary failures occurring together can feel planned when someone is already frightened. The figure itself may have been a person standing farther from the door than I believed. Someone dressed in black would appear featureless at night. The backlighting would erase facial detail and make the body look like a solid cutout. After the first shot, the person could have dropped behind cover or run sideways outside my field of view. The noise, muzzle flash, broken window, and my own movement would make it impossible to track them clearly. An attempted burglary remains one of the strongest explanations. The dog's reaction would make sense if he smelled an unfamiliar person. However, his fear was unusual. When someone had previously tried to break in, he had acted protectively. He barked, confronted the threat, and stayed near me. That night, he soiled the floor and ran. Why would a man outside frighten him more than an intruder entering the property? There may have been something different about the person. They could have smelled strongly of chemicals, alcohol, blood, another animal, or something the dog associated with danger. The dog might have been ill. He may have heard the gun being handled or sensed my panic before I consciously recognized it. Animals read human body language extremely well. If my breathing changed and my muscles became tense, he may have become frightened because I was frightened. His accident could also have occurred before I noticed it. The smell may have appeared suddenly only because I moved, or because the room became quiet enough for me to recognize it. He could have been suffering from a stomach problem unrelated to the figure. Then, when I grabbed the gun and turned quickly, he ran because he knew loud noises sometimes followed weapons. The dog may not have been reacting to the door at all. My memory places his eyes on the figure because that connection makes the sequence coherent. Trauma can do that. It joins separate details into one clear threat. The open curtain, the failed light, the dog's mess, the shadow. Each one becomes part of the same event even if they had different causes. The sighting could also have been created by lighting. With the indoor light off near the door and an outdoor light behind an object, almost anything could form a human silhouette. A tree trunk, hanging fabric, farm equipment, post, or combination of shadows might resemble a person. If branches moved, the figure could seem alive. The broken window and gun flashes would instantly destroy the original view, preventing me from checking. If the shape was an object, there would be no blood, footprints, or injured intruder. It would still be there afterward, but I may not have recognized it in daylight because the lighting had changed. The figure may even have been my own reflection. At night, glass can act like a mirror when the room behind the observer is brighter than the outside. But in this case, the nearby indoor light was off and there was backlighting outside, so the optics would have been complicated. A dark reflection from another part of the room could overlap the outdoor scene and look like someone standing beyond the glass. When I moved, the image might move in a way that seemed independent because of the angle. Fear could complete the shape. My need for glasses may have made the figure less defined. Instead of seeing a tree, coat, or person with clear edges, I saw a pure black body. Stress and isolation are also important. I had spent a year seeing movements and shadows. I was living in an unstable environment, often left alone without reliable adult protection. I closed every curtain and turned on every television because I was already afraid before anything happened. I placed the gun in front of me because I expected danger. By midnight, my nervous system may have been exhausted. A curtain being open could have triggered everything I had been holding back. Once I believed someone was outside, my brain selected the most threatening interpretation of every detail. The dog's accident became proof. The dark shape became a figure. The lack of facial detail made it less human rather than less certain. This does not mean I deliberately invented it. A frightened brain can produce a sincere and powerful misperception. People under extreme stress can see shadows, movement, or human forms that are not physically present. Sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, anxiety, and trauma can all increase that risk. I do not know how well I had been sleeping then. I was alone near midnight, watching television with every light in the house turned on. That suggests I had been living in a state of constant fear. There could also have been an environmental problem. Old rural homes can have mold, carbon monoxide, chemical exposure, poor ventilation, or electrical issues. Some of those can cause headaches, confusion, visual disturbances, or feelings of being watched. I have no evidence that any of those were present. Nobody else reported becoming sick, and the experiences seemed connected mostly to me. Still, the condition of the house is another unknown. The most disturbing detail is that the sightings stopped after that night. I never saw the moving shadows again. If the cause was my eyesight, trauma, or the house's lighting, why would firing at the figure end it? One explanation is that the event became a psychological breaking point. For a year, I ignored the shadows. That night, I confronted one. I acted, survived, and received an ordinary explanation from my father. My mind may have stopped producing the same threat because the story had reached an ending. The shadow was no longer something silently approaching at the edge of vision. I had fired at it, and it had disappeared. The fear had completed itself. Another explanation is that a real person had been watching or approaching the house over time. Perhaps some of the earlier movements were not hallucinations. Someone might have been entering the property, looking through windows, or testing the house while the adults were away. After being shot at, they never returned. That would explain why the experiences stopped. But it seems unlikely that the same person would repeatedly appear only as peripheral shadows for an entire year without leaving clearer evidence. I may be connecting unrelated events because of the final night. It is also possible that my circumstances changed afterward. Perhaps my father was home more often. Maybe my stepmother's behavior changed. We moved, the lighting was repaired, or I simply grew older and less frightened. The end of the sightings may have had nothing to do with the gunshots. Memory compresses time. After that night may mean the events gradually faded. Not that a switch was turned off immediately. I do not remember every week that followed. I remember only that the shadows were no longer part of my life. I have trouble calling the event supernatural. There are too many realistic explanations. A burglar, an animal or object outside, a reflection, poor vision, trauma and hypervigilance, a dog reacting to my fear or becoming ill. The absence of an injured person is not evidence that the bullets passed through a ghost. It is evidence that I did not hit anyone, which is fortunate. The fact that the third bullet traveled outside without striking a person may simply mean nobody stood in its path. The figure could have been several feet to one side of where I aimed. Panic destroys accurate judgment of distance and position. I also understand now that firing through a door or window without knowing exactly what was beyond it could have killed an innocent person. A neighbor, family member, police officer, or someone approaching for help might have been outside. At the time, I was a frightened young person placed in a situation I never should have been left to manage alone. The responsibility belonged to the adults who left a child isolated with access to a loaded firearm, not to some imaginary expectation that I should have handled the night perfectly. My father's calm response may have helped me survive the aftermath. He did not accuse me of lying. He did not tell me I was losing my mind. He chose the simplest explanation. Someone tried to break in, and I missed them. Then he focused on repairing the damage. Part of me still wonders whether he believed more than he said. Maybe he saw the dog's reaction, the open curtain, or something outside that he could not explain. Perhaps he decided that telling me it was a burglar would prevent me from becoming more afraid. Or perhaps he genuinely saw nothing unusual. A teenager fired at a dark shape in an isolated house. The intruder ran. Case closed. I will never know. The dog's behavior remains the hardest detail for me. He had proven himself brave before. He had protected me when real danger appeared. That night, he did not bark or attack. He emptied his body and fled. Animals can panic for reasons humans do not understand. A scent, sound, medical issue, or memory can overwhelm them. His reaction does not prove that the figure was paranormal, but it tells me that something in the room or outside the door affected him. Maybe it was my terror. Maybe it was a stranger. Maybe there was an animal outside that I mistook for a man, a bear standing upright, a large deer, livestock, or even several objects aligned in darkness could create a human-like shape and a scent that frightened the dog. Rural Alabama contains wildlife capable of approaching homes silently. The backlight might remove every animal feature and leave only a dark, upright mass. When the shots were fired, it could flee without leaving blood, because I missed. Tracks might be difficult to find on hard, dry, or disturbed ground. That explanation would connect the dog and the silhouette without requiring a human intruder. Still, I remember it as a man-shaped shadow. Not an animal, not a tree, not a reflection. Something stood outside the door, blocking the light, and I could see no detail within it. The image has remained because it matched everything I had seen at the edge of my vision during the previous year. It felt like the shadows had finally stopped hiding. Maybe that feeling came from trauma. Perhaps the moving shapes were my mind's way of expressing fear until the night it became too intense to ignore. The figure outside represented every uncertain threat in the house. My stepmother's instability, my father's absence, the isolation, the possibility of an intruder, the knowledge that no adult would reach me quickly if something happened. I fired at all of it. Then the shadows stopped. That interpretation does not mean the experience was imaginary in a dismissive sense. Trauma is real. Hypervigilance is real. A misperceived figure can produce real terror, real gunfire, broken glass, and a dog hiding in a bedroom. The consequences were physical, even if the shadow was not. Or perhaps my father was right. A burglar approached a house they believed was empty. They disturbed the curtain or were visible through a gap I had accidentally left. The dog smelled them and panicked for reasons I will never understand. I saw a black silhouette. I fired and missed. The person ran into the darkness and wisely never returned. That explanation is simple and possible. What prevents me from accepting it completely is the lack of evidence and the way the entire experience ended. No footprints I remember. No blood. No damaged lock. No dropped object. No person asking for medical help. No further sightings. Only 3 bullet holes, broken glass, the dog's mess, and my memory. I sometimes wonder whether the figure had been there at all. What if the curtain slipped open and revealed an object outside that I had never seen from that angle? What if the dog became sick at the same moment? What if months of fear made my brain turn the object into the shadow I had expected? The shots destroyed the view before I could look properly. I ran before I could gather more information. By morning, the light had changed. Whatever ordinary shape created the silhouette no longer looked the same. That may be the entire answer. But when I remember that night, I do not remember uncertainty. I remember recognition. I saw the figure and felt that it was the same thing I had been noticing around the house for a year. That certainty may have come from fear rather than fact, but it was immediate. The shadows at the edge of my vision had moved closer. They stood outside the glass. I was alone except for the one animal I trusted to protect me. Then, even he broke. He looked toward the back door, soiled the floor, and fled to my room. I fired 3 times. 2 rounds struck wood. One passed through the window and vanished into the darkness. Nothing screamed, nothing fell, nothing came inside. When my father returned, he repaired the damage and told me I had probably scared away a burglar. That is still the explanation I want to believe. A human being ran. The dog had an unusual fear response. My eyesight and trauma explain the earlier shadows. There was nothing supernatural in the house. But even after all these years, one question remains. If the figure was only a burglar, a reflection, or something created by my frightened mind, why did the dog see enough at that back door to abandon me and run? When I was in 3rd grade, I suffered carbon monoxide poisoning. At first, nobody understood what was happening to me. I became violently sick and could not stop throwing up. My vision began failing, and the world around me sometimes became dim or disappeared completely. The experience affected my eyesight badly enough that I eventually needed glasses. The physical illness was frightening. But what stayed with me most was what happened inside my mind. During that period, I began having strange dreams. The dreams themselves were never exactly the same. Sometimes I was at school, sometimes I was at home, or somewhere that did not exist in real life. The people and events changed, but one figure appeared again and again. He was a tall man dressed entirely in black. His skin was extremely pale. His eyes were black, but in the middle of each one was a small white pupil. His lips were bright red. He never seemed to belong in the dream. While everyone else spoke, moved, and interacted with me, he remained somewhere in the background. He might stand at the end of a hallway behind a group of people, or near the edge of a room. Sometimes he was so far away that I could only make out his heightened pale face. He never approached me. He never spoke. He only watched. No matter what was happening in the dream, I felt aware of him. Even when I tried to focus on something else, part of me knew where he was standing. His expression did not change. The black eyes and white pupils remained fixed on me, while the red lips made his pale face look unnatural. I was frightened, but because he appeared only in dreams at first, I tried not to think too seriously about him. I had been poisoned. My body was sick, my eyesight was changing, and my brain had been deprived of oxygen. Strange dreams seemed like another part of the illness. I told myself that when I recovered, the man would disappear. Then I began seeing him while I was awake. The first few times, the sightings were brief. I would notice him standing at the edge of a classroom or near the end of a hallway. I would turn my head, and he would be gone. Sometimes I saw him in the restroom, reflected behind me, or standing near a stall. Other times he appeared while I was outside with friends. Everyone around me continued talking and laughing, apparently unaware that a tall man in black was standing nearby. At first, I thought I was confusing ordinary people with the figure from my dreams. Someone wearing a dark coat might stand in the distance. My poor eyesight could remove the details from their face, allowing my mind to replace them with the pale skin, dark eyes, and red mouth I remembered. But the man sometimes appeared in places where nobody should have been standing. I would see him inside an empty room. He might be visible through a doorway for only a moment. Sometimes I saw only his face. The sightings never lasted long enough for me to approach him or prove that he was there. Every time I looked more carefully, the space was empty. I began calling them hallucinations. That explanation frightened me, but it was still better than believing the man was real. Carbon monoxide can affect the brain. I knew that what I had experienced was serious. The poisoning had made me vomit and lose vision. It was not difficult to believe that it could also make me see things that were not physically present. I expected the hallucinations to fade as I recovered. Instead, the man kept appearing. Years passed. 5 years after the poisoning, I still saw him. By then, the original medical emergency was no longer part of my daily life. I wore glasses and tried to live normally. Most people around me probably assumed I had recovered completely. But the figure remained. I might go weeks without seeing him, then suddenly notice him standing in the background. Every appearance frightened me, even when I was prepared for it. I would tell myself the same thing each time. He is not real. He is a hallucination. Your brain created him during the poisoning, and now it keeps bringing him back. That explanation gave me some control. If he was only a symptom, then he could not hurt me. He could stand in classrooms, restrooms, hallways, or outside with my friends. But he had no physical power. I tried not to react when he appeared. I did not want people to notice me staring at an empty corner. I worried they would think I was lying or trying to get attention. I also worried that if I described him, someone might tell me there was something seriously wrong with me. So I kept most of it private. But the more I ignored him, the more frequently he seemed to appear. Sometimes I wondered whether my attention caused the sightings. Once you become afraid of a particular face, you begin finding parts of it everywhere. A tall shadow becomes his body. A pale stranger becomes his face. A red object near someone's mouth becomes his lips. Dark reflections become his eyes. My damaged or imperfect vision may have provided unclear shapes, and my mind completed them using the most frightening image it knew. That could explain why he appeared in so many different places. He did not need to follow me. My brain carried him everywhere. Eventually, I decided I could no longer manage the fear alone. I spoke to a therapist. I described the carbon monoxide poisoning, the dreams, and the figure I continued seeing. I expected the therapist to explain that trauma and illness could cause recurring images. Instead, the therapist told me to speak with my doctor. That response made the situation feel more serious. A therapist suggesting a medical consultation did not mean the figure was real. It meant that visual experiences can have neurological, ophthalmological, medication-related, or other physical causes that need to be evaluated properly. Still, I became nervous before the appointment. I spoke to my doctor and explained what had been happening. What he told me scared me badly. He said that I had stopped hallucinating 3 years earlier. I did not understand how he could say that. From my point of view, the sightings had never stopped. I was still seeing the man. At first, the doctor's statement felt like confirmation that the figure was no longer connected to the poisoning. If the medical hallucinations had ended, then what had I been seeing for the last 3 years? But there are several less frightening ways to understand what he may have meant. He might have meant that the acute effects normally associated with the poisoning should have resolved 3 years earlier. Perhaps my medical records showed no recent reports of hallucinations because I had stopped mentioning them. A doctor cannot know with certainty that a private visual experience has ended unless the patient says so or medical testing supports a specific conclusion. He may have believed the original toxic exposure was no longer actively producing symptoms. Not that every strange image I saw afterward had to be something external. I may also have misunderstood his wording. Medical appointments can be stressful, especially when discussing something frightening. A sentence such as, "The hallucinations caused directly by the poisoning should have stopped 3 years ago can be remembered as you stopped hallucinating 3 years ago. Those meanings are not the same. The first leaves open the possibility of another medical, psychological, visual, or sleep-related cause. The second sounds as though a doctor has somehow proven that every later sighting is real. No doctor could establish that from a conversation alone. At the time, however, I did not make those distinctions. I left the appointment terrified. For years, I had protected myself by calling the man a hallucination. Now, I felt as though that protection had been taken away. About 2 weeks after the appointment, something began happening with my bedroom door. It would slowly open and close by itself. The first time, I assumed there was a draft. Doors move for ordinary reasons. Air pressure changes when another door or window opens elsewhere in the house. Heating and cooling systems can push air through a hallway. A door frame may be uneven, allowing gravity to pull the door in one direction. A loose latch can cause a door to release without anyone touching it. The hinges may also shift as temperature and humidity change. Still, after everything involving the man, the movement made me uneasy. I started recording the door on my phone. I tried to treat the situation as a joke. If the door opened by itself on camera, I could send the footage to friends and pretend the house was haunted. Turning it into something funny made it feel less threatening. I pointed the camera toward the doorway and waited. The door moved. I continued recording. Then I entered the bedroom and turned the camera toward myself. I planned to make a joke about living in a haunted house. Before I could finish, the door slammed behind me. The noise made me jump. At the same moment, I saw the tall man. He was inside the room. The black clothing, pale face, black eyes with white pupils, and red lips were all there. I dropped my phone and spun around. There was nobody behind me. The room was empty. The door was closed, but the figure had vanished. My heart was pounding. For a few seconds, I could not decide whether to stay in the room or run. I picked up the phone. The camera had continued recording after I dropped it. I reviewed the footage. The man appeared to be there. For the first time, I believed I had evidence that the figure did not exist only inside my vision. I watched the clip repeatedly. There seemed to be a tall, dark figure behind me when the door slammed. The pale face and other details may not have been perfectly clear on the small phone screen, but I recognized the shape immediately. I sent the video to a friend. I expected him to react with the same fear I felt. Instead, he said he did not believe me. He accused me of faking the recording. I insisted that the man had truly been there. My friend continued saying I was lying and should admit the truth. We argued for a couple of minutes. Eventually, I gave up. I told him he was right and said it had been a prank. It was easier than continuing to defend something I could not explain. I regretted that immediately. By admitting it was fake, I destroyed the only outside conversation I had about the video. If I showed it to anyone else, my friend could say I had already admitted creating it. But at the time, I felt embarrassed and frightened. I did not want to argue with someone who had already decided I was lying. Afterward, I tried to ignore the man again. I told myself that the video could have another explanation. Cameras do not record reality perfectly. A phone image can produce motion blur, compression artifacts, rolling shutter distortion, strange shadows, and shapes created by changing light. When a door slams, the phone may move suddenly. A coat, curtain, piece of furniture, or shadow can stretch across several frames and appear human. If the camera falls, the lens may briefly capture an angle that the person holding it never saw directly. A reflection from a mirror, television, window, or glossy surface could look like a figure. The door itself might cast a long shadow while moving. Because I already expected the tall man, any dark shape in the recording would immediately become him. The figure in the footage may not have contained the face I remember. My brain may have added the pale skin, black eyes, white pupils, and red lips, because those details belonged to the image I had seen for years. When I showed it to my friend, he may have seen only an unclear shadow. His accusation of fakery does not prove the footage was fake, but it suggests the image did not appear as undeniable to him as it did to me. If the video clearly showed a detailed unknown man standing in my room, his reaction might have been different. He may have thought I used editing, a costume, or another person. He may also have dismissed it, because the event sounded impossible. Still, the difference between what I saw and what he saw matters. Visual evidence is most useful when people who do not know the story can identify the same thing independently. If they need to be told where the face is and what it looks like, expectation may be influencing perception. I do not know whether the original footage still exists. If it does, it would be important to preserve the unedited file rather than a compressed copy sent through messaging. A careful review could examine individual frames, lighting, reflections, metadata, and the movement of the phone. That might reveal an ordinary explanation. But even a genuine, unexplained shape would not prove the man was supernatural. It would prove only that the camera recorded something difficult to identify. The door slamming may have been caused by airflow. When I entered the room, my movement could have changed pressure in the hallway. Another door or window may have opened elsewhere. The door might have been resting at an unstable angle and suddenly swung shut. The timing made it feel connected to the figure. But two things can happen at once without one causing the other. The visual experience could also have been triggered by the noise. A sudden slam produces a startle response. The brain rapidly searches for danger, especially when someone already fears a particular intruder. For a fraction of a second, I may have seen the expected figure. The image vanished when I turned because it was a stress-induced misperception rather than a person standing in the room. That would explain why I saw him only at the moment of the slam. The phone footage could contain a shadow from the same moving door, giving the event a physical-looking confirmation. The carbon monoxide poisoning remains important, but it may not be the only cause. A serious poisoning can be traumatic. Even after the immediate medical effects resolve, memories and fears can continue. A recurring figure may become associated with illness, helplessness, vomiting, blindness, hospitals, and the fear of death. The man began in dreams during a time when my body was in danger. He watched from the background without helping. Perhaps he became the face my mind gave to the poisoning itself. Once created, the image could return during stress. He might appear when I felt trapped, watched, or uncertain. That is not the same as intentionally imagining him. Trauma-related images can arrive involuntarily and feel external. Visual problems may also have contributed. I lost vision during the poisoning and later needed glasses. Blurred vision can turn ordinary people and objects into simplified forms. Faces lose detail. Dark clothing becomes a single shape. Bright colors stand out more strongly. If my eyesight was not fully corrected, a distant stranger could resemble the man until I looked directly or moved closer. There are also neurological conditions, migraines, seizure-related symptoms, medication effects, sleep disorders, and eye conditions that can cause repeated visual experiences. A doctor would need accurate, current information to investigate those possibilities. The statement that the original hallucinations had supposedly ended should not have been treated as the end of the medical discussion. If someone continues seeing a recurring figure, especially after carbon monoxide poisoning or vision loss, that continued experience itself is relevant medical information. It deserves assessment without assuming either that the person is lying or that the figure is supernatural. What frightens me most is the possibility that I will never stop seeing him. The man has been present in my memory for years. Even if every appearance is explained by dreams, damaged vision, trauma, shadows, and expectation, knowing that does not prevent the fear. When he appears, the reaction happens before reasoning. I see the pale face and black eyes. My body prepares for danger. Only afterward do I remind myself that I have seen him before and survived. There is another reason the figure may continue. The more often I check for him, the more likely I am to find something that resembles him. If I enter a restroom already worried that he will be there, I scan every stall, reflection, and doorway. If I sit in class expecting him in the background, every tall shadow receives extra attention. This is not a personal failure. It is how fear trains perception. The brain becomes highly efficient at detecting the feared pattern, even when the pattern is incomplete. Over time, the man may become easier to see because I know every detail of him. He needs only a black shape, a pale patch, and a small red object to become complete. The recurring dreams probably strengthen the image too. Dreams can make invented faces feel familiar. Each appearance reinforces the same features: the white pupils and black eyes, the red lips, the height, the black clothing. Even if the original figure came from a movie, drawing, person, or random dream combination I no longer remember, years of repetition transformed him into someone my mind recognizes instantly. That familiarity can feel like evidence that he exists independently. But familiarity can also be produced by repetition alone. I still cannot fully explain the video. That remains the detail that prevents the story from becoming a simple account of hallucinations after poisoning. I believe the camera saw him too. Perhaps it did. Perhaps the recording captured a real person who entered and left too quickly for me to find. But a real intruder would create other questions. How did he enter the room? Where did he go when I turned around? Why had he appeared in dreams and brief sightings for years before physically entering the house? Why would he stand silently behind me for 1 second and then vanish? A human intruder does not fit well. A paranormal figure fits the story more neatly, but neatness is not evidence. It may fit only because the mind has already connected every strange event to the same face. The camera could have recorded an ordinary shadow at exactly the moment I hallucinated or misperceived the man. That coincidence would feel impossible. But the door slam created both. The moving door caused the shadow. The slam startled me. The startle produced the familiar figure. One physical event created two forms of apparent evidence. That is a plausible explanation. I also have to question how the footage changed in memory. Did the man appear clearly the first time I watched it? Or did I pause, rewind, and study a dark blur until I recognized him? Did my friend truly see a figure and assume I had staged it? Or did he see nothing and think the whole claim was a prank? Those details matter, but fear can make them difficult to remember accurately. The central memory remains stronger than the exact conversation. I saw him. I checked the recording. He was there. My friend did not believe me. I said it was fake to end the argument. That sequence is emotionally clear, even if the visual evidence itself was ambiguous. I do not think the safest conclusion is that a supernatural man has followed me since childhood. I also do not think the experience should be dismissed as just imagination. Something serious happened to my body and brain when I was young. I experienced recurring dreams and waking visions. Those experiences continued long enough to affect how I lived and how safe I felt. Whether the source was neurological, psychological, visual, sleep-related, or a combination, the fear was real. The most responsible interpretation is uncertainty. The man may have begun as a hallucination during poisoning. He may have continued as a recurring image supported by trauma, expectation, and vision problems. The door may have moved because of air pressure or faulty hinges. The footage may have captured a shadow or digital distortion. My doctor's statement may have been misunderstood or may have referred only to the acute poisoning. All of that can be true without accusing me of lying. I know what I experienced. I also know experience is not always a perfect description of what physically occurred. The figure felt external. That does not prove it was. The video looked convincing to me. That does not prove it showed the same man. The doctor's words frightened me. That does not mean he confirmed anything supernatural. For years, I believed I had only two choices. Either the man was a hallucination, or he was real. Now I understand there are many possibilities between those answers. A real shadow can combine with an unreal face. A dream can continue into waking vision. A medical symptom can end while a trauma-linked image remains. A camera can record an object that the mind interprets according to years of fear. Memory can preserve certainty while losing the details needed to test it. None of those explanations is as simple as saying the man was never there. But they do not require him to be an actual being watching from the background of my life. Even so, I still remember the first dreams. I was a sick child whose vision was failing. People and places changed from night to night, but the tall man remained. He stood far behind everyone else, dressed in black. His skin was pale. His eyes were dark except for the tiny white pupils. His lips were red. He never spoke. He only watched. Years later, after I had told myself again and again that he was a symptom, I stood in my bedroom recording a door that seemed to move on its own. The door slammed. I saw him behind me. I turned, and the room was empty. Then I checked the phone and believed I saw him there, too. Maybe the recording captured only a shadow. Maybe the poisoning, fear, and years of expectation supplied the face. That is the explanation I try to accept. Because the alternative means the man was never trapped inside my dreams or damaged vision. It means he had always been standing somewhere behind me, waiting for a camera to look in the right direction.
Before the next story begins, thank you for staying here in the dark. If this is your first visit, subscribe to Wickless Night for more true stories made for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every little noise feels important. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has made you look around the room so far. Now, let's continue.
I do not remember exactly how old we were when this happened, but the memory is still clear to me. My sister and cousin remember it too. We were playing outside in the garden during the day. It was only the three of us, and nothing unusual had been happening. The weather seemed calm. There was a light breeze, but it was barely strong enough to move the leaves or plants around us. My cousin's family kept several rabbits in cages nearby. They also had a beagle that stayed in a kennel outside. The animals were used to us playing in the garden. Children running, shouting, and moving around the property did not normally bother them. At some point, I left my sister and cousin in the garden and went to use the outdoor toilet. I had only been inside for a short time when I heard a sound unlike anything I had heard before. It sounded like an aircraft. Not a small plane flying normally overhead, but something much larger and much lower. The noise was incredibly loud. It had a pulsing quality to it. almost as though the engines were struggling. The sound rose and fell in repeated waves, creating the impression that the aircraft was losing control or preparing to make an emergency landing. My immediate thought was that something was about to crash. The sound seemed far too close. I expected to hear an impact somewhere near the property. I ran out of the toilet immediately. My sister and cousin were still in the garden, and both of them looked frightened. They had heard it too. There was no need for me to explain why I had run outside. All three of us were reacting to the same enormous noise. We looked upward. There was nothing in the sky. That made no sense. The sound seemed to be directly above or very close to us. It was loud enough that a normal aircraft should have been easy to see. We searched the sky in every direction. No plane, no helicopter, no trail of smoke, no dark shape moving between clouds. As far as I remember, the sky was clear enough that there was nowhere for something large to hide. The noise continued. Then the wind began. Before I entered the outdoor toilet, the breeze had been weak. It had barely moved the trees. Now the branches were bending violently in one direction. The plants and leaves were being pushed as though something powerful was passing over them. The wind did not feel like an ordinary gust arriving with changing weather. It seemed connected to the sound, like the force produced by a low-flying aircraft. The trees appeared close to being pushed over. Whatever was causing it seemed to be driving the air downward or sideways with enormous power. All three of us continued searching the sky. There was still nothing visible. The rabbits began panicking. Every rabbit in the cages started running from wall to wall. They were not simply moving around nervously. They were throwing themselves from one side of the enclosure to the other as though desperate to escape. The beagle reacted too. It ran around inside its kennel and barked wildly. The animals seemed to sense danger coming from all around them. Their fear made the experience feel more real. Children can misunderstand sounds. We can frighten one another, mistake wind for machinery, or imagine movement in the sky. But the animals were reacting independently. They were not listening to us describe an aircraft. They heard or felt something themselves. Then we looked at my little sister. Her hair was standing upward. It was not blowing sideways with the wind. The strands appeared to lift toward the sky as though she had come into contact with static electricity. I remember staring at it because it looked completely unnatural. The air around us was already filled with the loud pulsing sound, violent wind, and panicking animals. Seeing her hair rise made us believe something electrical was happening too. Yet there was still nothing above us. The noise lasted for what felt like a long time. It did not pass quickly the way a jet normally would. A low aircraft should have crossed the visible sky within seconds. Even if we missed it approaching, we should have seen it leaving. Instead, the sound continued while the source remained invisible. We kept turning our heads, trying to locate it. At times, it seemed to come from one side, then from another. Perhaps it was echoing across the buildings or landscape. It was so loud that direction became difficult to judge. Eventually, the sound weakened and disappeared. The powerful wind stopped. The garden became calm again. The animals gradually settled. Nothing crashed. No aircraft appeared in the distance. There was no smoke rising beyond the trees. We were left standing outside with no explanation. Even now, my sister and cousin remember the experience in the same basic way. They remember the sound. They remember the wind. They remember the animals panicking. They remember that we could not see anything in the sky. That shared memory is one of the reasons I have never been able to dismiss it as a dream or something I imagined alone. Something happened around us. The question is what? The most likely explanation is probably some kind of aircraft that we failed to see. Sound can travel in confusing ways, especially in rural or open areas. A plane may be much farther away than it sounds. Temperature, wind direction, hills, and buildings can bend or reflect sound, making an aircraft seem directly overhead when it is actually several kilometers away. If the plane was hidden behind a cloud, tree line, building, or part of the roof, we might search the wrong section of sky. But that explanation does not easily account for the force of the wind. The trees were bending as though powerful air was passing over the garden. A distant aircraft should not create that effect. A helicopter flying very low could produce intense downward wind. Its rotors would create repeated pulsing noise, and the downdraft could bend branches and frighten animals. A helicopter might also remain in the area for longer than a plane. The sound could seem as though it were about to crash if the rotor beat was unfamiliar. The problem is that a low helicopter should have been visible. It would be difficult for something large enough to create that much wind to remain completely hidden from three people actively searching the sky. Unless the helicopter was behind nearby trees or buildings, we should have seen at least part of it. There might have been military activity. Military aircraft can fly lower and sound very different from commercial planes. Some helicopters or jets produce deep pulsing vibrations that can be felt as much as heard. If more than one aircraft passed in formation, the overlapping engine noise could create a strange rhythm. One aircraft might be visible only briefly before another took its place, giving the impression that the sound remained stationary. But once again, visibility is the problem. We saw nothing. It is possible that the object was hidden by a layer of cloud or mist too thin for us to remember clearly. Sound and wind could reach the ground while the aircraft remained inside the cloud. A helicopter operating in poor visibility would be dangerous, but not impossible. However, I remember looking into an apparently open sky, not a solid cloud ceiling. Childhood memory can simplify weather conditions over time. There may have been more cloud cover than I now remember. Another possibility is that the wind and sound came from a sudden weather event rather than an aircraft. Strong downdrafts can descend from storms and strike the ground with powerful wind. They can arrive suddenly, push trees in one direction, and create a roaring sound similar to an engine or train. If the storm itself was some distance away, the sky directly above us might still appear relatively clear. A powerful gust front could pass through without heavy rain. The animals would react to the pressure change, noise, and wind. That would explain the bending trees and panic in the cages. The pulsing sound might have come from wind moving through trees, buildings, vents, or other structures. Wind does not always produce a steady roar. It can arrive in waves and create rhythmic vibrations that resemble machinery. An outdoor toilet, roof, fence, or loose sheet of metal might amplify the sound. Several objects vibrating together could produce something that sounded exactly like a damaged aircraft. But the wind had seemed to come from the thing rather than before it. That may be an interpretation we formed because the sound resembled an aircraft. We heard the roar, then noticed the trees bending, so we connected the two as engine and downdraft. In reality, both could have been parts of the same weather event. The detail of my sister's hair standing upward may support an atmospheric explanation. Hair can rise when there is a strong electrical field in the air. This can sometimes happen near an approaching thunderstorm, especially when conditions allow static charge to build. If that was the cause, it could have indicated a dangerous risk of lightning. The rabbits and dog may have reacted to the electrical charge, changes in air pressure, distant thunder, or low-frequency sound that we could not fully perceive. We may have been beneath or near a developing storm, even if no lightning struck and no obvious thundercloud appeared directly overhead. The aircraft noise could have been thunder distorted by distance. Thunder sometimes rolls continuously or pulses as sound arrives from different parts of a lightning channel. It can seem to move around the sky and remain audible much longer than one ordinary crack. If the sound reflected from hills or clouds, it might appear mechanical. The wind could have been the front edge of the storm. There are problems with this explanation, too. I do not remember seeing lightning. I do not remember rain following. The sky did not seem dark or stormy. The sound was not like thunder to us. It sounded like an aircraft in trouble. But children may not recognize unusual thunder, especially if it is continuous rather than explosive. A storm can also remain far enough away that rain never reaches a specific property. The static hair remains one of the strongest clues that electricity may have been present. It could also have been caused by ordinary static rather than the atmosphere. My sister's hair may have been dry and fine. The strong wind could lift it upward in a way that looked electrical from where we stood. She may have touched plastic playground equipment, clothing, or another object that created a static charge. If we were already frightened, we would interpret her hair as another impossible part of the event. Memory may also have exaggerated the direction. Perhaps it was blowing upward and sideways, not pointing perfectly toward the sky. The detail remained because it was visually dramatic. The animal's reactions can be explained without anything supernatural. Rabbits are prey animals and can panic at sudden loud sounds. They may run violently around their cages when frightened by thunder, engines, predators, or unfamiliar vibration. A beagle has sensitive hearing and a strong response to unusual smells and movement. The dog may have heard frequencies from an aircraft or storm that we could not hear. It may also have reacted to the rabbits and to our fear. Once one animal panics, the others can follow. Their behavior proves that a real environmental disturbance occurred, but it does not identify the source. There could have been an aircraft beyond our view creating a sonic effect. A jet flying fast at high altitude may be difficult to locate because the sound reaches the ground after the aircraft has moved far from the position where it appears to be. People often look toward the sound while the plane is already elsewhere. If the aircraft traveled near or above the speed of sound, the noise could be extremely loud and seem to come from an empty part of the sky. A sonic boom can also shake buildings and frighten animals. However, a sonic boom is usually a sharp, explosive sound rather than a long, pulsing aircraft noise. It would not normally produce sustained wind strong enough to bend trees. The wind may have been unrelated and happened at the same time. Two ordinary events could have overlapped, a distant jet and a sudden gust. Because they occurred together, we understood them as one invisible machine passing overhead. There might also have been heavy machinery nearby. A large vehicle, industrial machine, agricultural equipment, or generator could create pulsing engine noise. If it operated behind trees or buildings, we might assume the sound came from the sky. Farm machinery can be surprisingly loud and produce vibrations that travel through the ground and air. A large fan, crop dusting operation, or machine used by a neighbor might also create strong air movement. But the wind across the garden seemed too broad and sudden for a machine on the ground. The nearest equipment would probably have remained audible after the event and might have been identifiable by an adult. I do not remember asking adults whether they heard it. That information could have helped. If people farther away also heard the noise, it would suggest an aircraft, thunder, or regional event. If only our garden was affected, the cause would be much more local. I also do not remember whether any branches were broken, objects moved, or damage remained afterward. Physical evidence could tell us how strong the wind truly was. As children, the trees were almost falling over may have described a dramatic but normal gust. Tall trees can bend a great deal without being in danger of falling. In a frightening moment, the movement can seem much stronger than it is. Distance and size are difficult to judge from memory. The sound may also have caused vibration that made the trees appear to shake more than they actually did. Fear changes attention. We noticed every branch, animal, and strand of hair because we believed something was above us. Another explanation is a rare acoustic illusion. Sound from an aircraft can be refracted by layers of air, especially when temperatures differ with altitude. The noise may become concentrated in one area, making a distant aircraft sound extremely close. The plane itself could be far beyond the visible horizon or hidden behind terrain. The wind we felt might have been a separate weather gust, arriving at the same moment. The combined experience would be convincing enough that all three of us believed an invisible aircraft was directly overhead. Shared sightings do not guarantee a shared interpretation is correct. We were standing together, looking at the same frightened animals and bending trees. Once one of us called the noise an aircraft, the others likely adopted the same idea. The sound had no visible source, so our minds created the most familiar explanation. A plane about to crash. That does not mean the experience was imaginary. The noise and wind were real. Only the conclusion about what caused them may have been mistaken. There is also the possibility of a short-lived electrical event in the atmosphere. A charged cloud or unseen storm system could cause static hair, animal agitation, wind, and strange sound. Some electrical discharges produce humming, buzzing, or crackling before lightning. Objects may vibrate or emit tones. If the air was highly charged, metal fencing, cages, or structures around the garden might produce unusual noises. The pulsing sound could have been several sources resonating together. This would have been dangerous, even without a visible lightning strike. The safest response would have been to go indoors immediately, rather than remain outside searching the sky. We did not know that. We were children trying to understand what seemed like a crashing aircraft. If my sister's hair truly stood straight upward because of an electrical field, that may have been a warning that lightning could strike nearby. The fact that nothing happened does not mean the conditions were safe. The charge may have weakened or moved away. The wind and sound may have marked the edge of the system passing over us. This explanation accounts for more details than a completely invisible vehicle, although I cannot confirm it. The memory itself must be treated carefully. I do not know our exact ages. I do not know the date, season, weather report, or location of nearby airfields. Years have passed. The three of us may have repeated the story together, strengthening the same details. When people discuss a shared childhood event, memories can gradually align. One person remembers the trees bending. Another remembers the hair. A third remembers the animals. After hearing each other's accounts, everyone begins carrying the complete version. That does not mean the story is false. It means it may now be a family memory rather than three completely independent recordings. The core event is probably reliable because all of us remember being frightened by a loud, unseen source. The precise length, wind strength, and appearance of the hair may have changed. Still, something unusual happened. It was loud enough to pull me out of the outdoor toilet. My sister and cousin were already frightened before I reached them. The animals reacted before we had time to build a story around the event. Those points suggest a genuine physical disturbance. I do not believe we witnessed an invisible supernatural aircraft. There is no reason to begin with that explanation when weather, sound distortion, or a hidden aircraft could account for the experience. Nothing visible does not always mean nothing physical was present. The source may have been farther away, obscured, or located somewhere we did not think to look. The wind may have had a different cause from the noise. Our young minds may have combined several events into one impossible object. But I understand why the memory remains powerful. An aircraft is supposed to be visible. If its engines are loud enough to make you think it is crashing into the garden, there should be a body attached to the sound. There should be wings crossing the sky. There should be movement, smoke, or a shape getting larger. We saw none of that. Only the effects, the noise, the wind, the bending trees, the terrified animals. My sister's hair lifting upward. It felt as though something huge occupied the air above us while refusing to become visible. I sometimes imagine what the scene would have looked like from a distance. 3 children standing in a garden, staring upward. Rabbits throwing themselves against the walls of their cages. A beagle barking and running in circles. Trees bending under a sudden force. One child's hair raised into the air. Above all of it, an empty sky. The most likely answer may be an unusual combination of weather and distant aircraft noise. A powerful gust or storm front passed over the property, while a plane or helicopter was somewhere beyond our view. The sound reflected in a way that made it seem directly overhead. The animals reacted to both. Static electricity or wind lifted my sister's hair. Nothing appeared because there was never one invisible object causing every effect. That explanation is reasonable. It may be correct, but it does not recreate the way the experience felt. We did not hear 2 unrelated noises and notice a normal breeze. We heard one immense pulsing roar that seemed to be descending on us. The air began moving with enough force to push the trees away. Everything alive around us panicked. We looked upward because there was nowhere else the source could be. For a long time, the sound continued. The sky remained empty. My sister and cousin still remember it. When we compare the story, none of us can provide the missing object. There was only the certainty that something was flying low above the garden, close enough to shake the air and frighten every animal on the property. Yet no matter how long we searched, there was never anything there to see. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I slept with my bedroom door open and the hallway light left on. I did not like complete darkness. The light from the hall gave my room a soft glow and made the doorway feel safer. If I woke during the night, I could see the familiar shape of the walls, the furniture, and the open path toward my parents' room. At least, that was how it was supposed to feel. Instead, the doorway became the place where the same strange experience began almost every night. I would be lying in bed, looking toward the hall. I did not always feel sleepy, and I often believed I was still fully awake when it started. Without warning, the silhouette of a man would hop sideways into the doorway. He did not simply walk into view. He entered with a sudden, exaggerated movement, almost like a performer arriving on stage. The hallway light remained behind him, so I could not see a face, clothing, or skin. His entire body appeared black against the brighter doorway. Then he began to tap dance. That is the closest way I can describe it. He moved his feet in a quick, rhythmic routine, shifting his weight and making the kind of movements I associated with old dancers or performers. I do not remember hearing clear music. I am not even certain I heard his shoes striking the floor. What remained vivid was the movement itself. The figure danced in the doorway while I watched from bed. I do not remember feeling the same kind of terror I would feel if a stranger entered the house. The experience was frightening, but it also followed such a consistent pattern that part of me knew what would happen next. The dancer would finish his routine. Then everything around me would disappear. The bedroom did not fade gradually. The walls, bed, doorway, and hallway seemed to fall away at once. It felt as though the whole room had dropped through a void. The space around me became a solid, dark blue. It was not the ordinary blackness of a room with the lights off. It was a deep, complete blue with no visible walls, floor, ceiling, or horizon. There was nothing to hold on to. I would fall through it. Below the blue void was a train. The train was entirely black. I do not remember seeing windows, passengers, tracks, or any clear machinery. I understood it as a train, even though it may not have had all the details of a real one. It felt more like the idea of a train given a shape. The blue emptiness pulled me downward until I entered or reached the black train. Then I would wake up. The strange part was that I never remembered falling asleep. One moment, I was awake in bed, watching the open doorway. The next, the silhouette appeared, performed its dance, and caused the room to collapse into the void. Then I woke as though the entire sequence had been a dream. But from my perspective, there had been no clear boundary between waking and sleeping. I did not remember closing my eyes or losing awareness. The experience began inside the same bedroom I was already looking at. That made it feel less like a normal dream and more like something entering the real room. This happened often, not once or twice, but enough that the sequence became familiar. The hallway light, the open door, the man hopping into the frame, the tap dance routine, the dark blue void, the black train, then waking. The order rarely changed. I came to expect each part as soon as the silhouette appeared. As an adult, I understand that recurring dreams can follow exact patterns. A child may dream the same monster, hallway, fall, or chase many nights in a row. Once the mind learns the sequence, anticipation can make it repeat. But at the time, I did not believe I was dreaming. I believed I was lying awake when the man entered the doorway. The most confusing experience happened when I spent the night at a friend's house. My friend also slept with his bedroom door open and the hallway light on. That detail should have been comforting. The room was different from mine, but the arrangement felt familiar. There was a bed, an open doorway, and a bright hall beyond it. My friend fell asleep before I did. I remained awake, looking toward the doorway. Then the silhouette appeared. It hopped into the frame exactly as it did at home. The surroundings were different, but the man was the same. He performed the tap dance routine. When he stopped, the room disappeared. Everything fell through the solid dark blue void. The black train appeared below. Then I woke up. But I did not wake in my friend's bedroom. I woke in my own room at home. I remember being confused. I knew I had gone to sleep at my friend's house. I remembered being in his room while he slept beside me or nearby. Yet now, I appeared to be back in my own bed. The experience frightened me enough that I went into my mother's room and climbed into her bed. I fell asleep there. The next morning, nothing seemed unusual. My mother did not ask how I had returned home. She did not seem surprised to find me in her bed. Nobody said I had been missing from my friend's house or that someone had brought me home in the middle of the night. There was no conversation explaining an impossible journey. Life continued normally. That creates an obvious problem with the memory. If I had physically gone to sleep at my friend's house and then somehow awakened in my own bedroom, the adults would have noticed. Someone would have needed to transport me. My friend's parents would know I was gone. My mother would know I had returned. There would be a story about me becoming frightened, asking to go home, or being carried back while asleep. But I remember none of that. My mother's reaction, as I recall it, was completely ordinary. She behaved as though there was nothing strange about me entering her room. The most likely explanation is that I never truly woke in my own bedroom. I dreamed that I did. The experience may have contained a false awakening. A false awakening happens when a person dreams that they have woken up, often in a familiar bedroom. The room can appear almost exactly correct. The person may sit up, walk through the house, speak to someone, or begin an ordinary morning routine before waking for real. Because the dream includes the sensation of waking, it feels different from a normal dream. The person believes they are conscious. Sometimes several false awakenings occur in a row. Someone wakes, discovers something strange, wakes again, and only later realizes all the earlier awakenings were still part of the dream. That could explain the entire night at my friend's house. I was asleep there. I dreamed the familiar doorway figure and train sequence. Then I dreamed that I woke in my own bedroom. Inside that dream, I went to my mother's bed and fell asleep again. At some later point, I truly woke at my friend's house, but that part did not remain in memory. Or I may have returned home normally the next day, and the dream memory became attached to my own room. Because I was 5 or 6, I did not have the language to separate a false awakening from a real one. I only remembered waking at home. Another possibility is that the sleepover memory and the home memory became combined over time. Perhaps the dancing figure appeared at my friend's house, and on a different night I woke at home and went to my mother's bed. Years later, the two experiences merged into one continuous event. Childhood memories are not stored like recordings. They are rebuilt from fragments. Repeated dreams can make this even more complicated because the same images appear in different places and at different times. If the silhouette, void, and train occurred dozens of times, individual episodes may no longer remain separate. The sleepover became one variation of the recurring dream. The ending in my mother's bed came from another night. My memory joined them because the sequence felt familiar. The repeated doorway arrangement probably triggered the experience. At home, I slept with the door open and the hallway light behind it. At my friend's house, the room had the same basic visual structure. A bright rectangle surrounded by darkness is an ideal shape for the mind to turn into a stage. Any shadow crossing the hallway could become a person. A parent walking past, a hanging coat, a door moving, or even changes in light could create the outline of a figure. Once I had experienced the dancing man several times, my brain expected him whenever I stared at a similar doorway. At my friend's house, the unfamiliar room may have made me more alert. I could not fall asleep easily, so I watched the hall. The familiar lighting pattern activated the same dream before I recognized that I had drifted off. The silhouette may have been a hypnagogic hallucination. These hallucinations happen during the transition from waking to sleep. A person may still see the real bedroom while dream images begin appearing over it. They can see people standing in doorways, shapes moving across the room, faces, lights, or animals. They may hear music, footsteps, voices, or knocking. Because the person feels awake and the environment is real. The hallucination appears to exist physically in the room. That fits my experience extremely well. I believed I had not fallen asleep because part of me was still aware of the open door and hallway light. But my brain may already have entered a dream state. The black silhouette was the first dream image. The tap dance was the transition. The room falling into the blue void marked the moment the dream completely replaced waking perception. Then the black train carried me deeper into sleep. The feeling of waking afterward may have been another transition rather than a true awakening. Children can experience these boundaries very vividly. Their sleep cycles are different from those of adults, and their imaginations are active. A recurring hypnagogic image could appear almost every night without meaning anything was physically entering the doorway. The silhouette's lack of detail also supports this explanation. I never saw a clear face. The body was completely black. It existed where the hallway light would naturally turn a real person into a shadow. The brain did not need to invent complicated features. It only used the human outline suggested by the doorway. The dancing may have come from something I had seen on television. Older films, cartoons, stage shows, and children's programs often included exaggerated tap dancing characters. I may have watched a performer hopping into a doorway or dancing across a stage. The image stayed in my memory and returned at bedtime. At 5 or 6, I might not remember the source. The dancer felt original and unexplained because I had forgotten where I first saw the movement. The train may also have come from media or toys. Children encounter trains constantly in books, cartoons, songs, and games. A black train in a dream can represent movement without needing a clear destination. It may have been the vehicle my mind used to move from one level of sleep to another. The solid blue void could have come from the dark blue appearance of the room when my eyes adjusted to low light. Human vision in darkness often loses color detail, but some people perceive deep blue or gray fields. With the hallway light removed from attention, the rest of the room may have seemed dark blue. As sleep took over, that color expanded until it became the entire world. The sensation of falling is also common while falling asleep. Sometimes the body suddenly jerks because the brain interprets muscle relaxation as falling. These are called hypnic jerks. A child experiencing that sensation might dream that the whole bedroom dropped into a void. The black train appeared at the bottom because the mind needed somewhere for the fall to end. The complete sequence may have been built from several normal sleep events, a real doorway seen in low light, a shadow-like hallucination, a remembered dancer, the sensation of falling, a dream image of a train, then a false awakening. Because the same conditions occurred night after night, the sequence repeated. The phrase "I woke up even though I never fell asleep" is almost a perfect description of slipping into sleep without noticing. Most people do not experience the exact instant they lose consciousness. One moment they are thinking in bed. The next, they are waking in the morning. If a dream begins with the same room and same body position, there is no obvious break. The person believes the experience happened while awake. This is especially common in dreams involving bedrooms. The mind recreates the environment so accurately that the dream disguises itself as reality. The silhouette's routine may have functioned like a signal that sleep was beginning. I saw him. Then the world changed. After enough repetitions, the sequence became automatic. The expectation itself could trigger it. If I lay in bed thinking, "Will the dancing man appear tonight?" my brain was already preparing the image. That does not mean I consciously invented him. Fear and expectation can produce unwanted images without control. The experience was real to me, even if the figure was not physically present. I may also have been experiencing sleep paralysis, although the description does not match it completely. During sleep paralysis, a person becomes mentally aware while the body remains unable to move. Many people see dark figures in the room or doorway. They may feel watched, hear noises, or sense a presence. The figures often appear as silhouettes because the brain is combining fear with low-light vision. I do not remember being unable to move. I also remember the entire room falling away rather than remaining trapped in bed. Still, sleep paralysis can blend with other dream states. I may have been partly paralyzed during the figure's appearance, then entered a normal dream. At 5 or 6, I would not remember testing whether I could move. I only watched the routine. The fact that the man danced rather than threatened me is unusual but not impossible. Dream figures do not always behave like monsters. Sometimes the most disturbing images are strange rather than violent. A silent man performing a cheerful routine in a doorway at night can feel wrong, because the action does not match the setting. Tap dancing belongs on a stage, not outside a child's bedroom. The figure's behavior may have been harmless in the dream, but the repetition gave it power. He always arrived before the world disappeared. I may have feared him not because he attacked me, but because he signaled that I was about to lose control of reality. The void and train were inevitable once he stopped. That kind of pattern can become deeply unsettling. The dancer was almost like someone pressing a switch. He completed the routine, and the room collapsed. I sometimes wonder whether I heard actual tapping from somewhere in the house. Pipes, heating systems, clocks, appliances, or footsteps in the hallway could create rhythmic noises at night. The sleeping brain might interpret repeated taps as dancing shoes. If the sound occurred around the same time each evening, perhaps when the heating changed or a family member walked past, it could trigger the same image. The man then danced in time with the real noise. This would explain why the performance felt so consistent. A mechanical sound provided the rhythm. When the sound stopped, the dream changed. The hallway light itself may have flickered or been interrupted by someone moving past it. A shadow hopping suddenly into the doorway could come from a person crossing the hall, even if they never entered my room. The real movement lasted only a second. My half-asleep brain extended it into a complete dance routine. If I asked my parents now, they might remember checking the hallway at night or walking past my door. They probably would not remember anything significant because, to them, it was ordinary. A shadow cast by a parent could become the recurring performer without anyone knowing. The sleepover remains the most disturbing variation because it seemed to break the rules of location. The figure should have belonged to my house. Instead, he appeared in a different doorway. Then, I seemed to wake at home. As a child, that might feel like evidence that the experience could transport me. As an adult, it strongly suggests a dream. Dreams move between places without explaining the journey. A bedroom at a friend's house can transform into a childhood bedroom in one moment. The dreamer accepts the change until waking. The mind may even create a feeling of surprise. How did I get home? While remaining asleep. Then it continues with another familiar action, such as going to a parent's bed. My mother's ordinary reaction does not confirm that I physically returned. It may be part of the false awakening. Dream characters often behave as though impossible events are normal. My dream version of my mother had no reason to ask how I got there because the dream did not require an explanation. She simply allowed me into bed. The fact that nothing changed after that is another sign. The world continued smoothly because the entire scene remained inside the same sleeping mind. It is also possible that I woke at my friend's house, became frightened, and asked to go home. An adult may have driven me back during the night. I could have been half asleep in the car and forgotten the journey. My mother might not have asked how I got there, because she already knew someone was bringing me home. When I later entered her bed, the situation was completely expected. At 5 or 6, adults could arrange all of that without explaining every detail to me. The next morning, I might remember only the dream and the final bedroom. If that happened, there would be nothing impossible at all. I became frightened at the sleepover. My friend's parents contacted mine. Someone brought me home. I fell asleep in my mother's bed. The transport disappeared from memory because I was tired or asleep. This explanation is possible, but I do not remember being upset before the experience ended. I remember the transition directly from the train to my room. Still, childhood memory can remove long sections while preserving vivid images. A nighttime car ride could easily vanish. The adults involved may not remember it now. There may have been a simple family explanation that was never important enough to repeat. Another possibility is that the entire sleepover itself occurred in a dream. Maybe I was sleeping at home and dreamed I had gone to my friend's house. The doorway there triggered the familiar sequence. Then I woke in the correct bedroom because I had never left. My memory may treat the sleepover as real because I had genuinely stayed there on another occasion. The mind used a known place and friend to create the dream. When I woke at home, I felt confused because the dream had been realistic. I went to my mother for comfort. She showed no surprise because I had been home all night. That explanation fits her reaction perfectly, but I likely have other memories confirming the sleepover happened. Perhaps I remember the evening, the friend's family, or activities before bed. If so, the sleepover was probably real. Still, a vivid dream of a familiar friend's house could borrow real memories and feel like a complete visit. Without external confirmation, it is difficult to know. The fact that my mother did not react strangely may also be unreliable. She might have asked questions that I no longer remember. The memory's focus is the dancer, an impossible awakening, not the conversation afterward. She may have said, "You came home last night because you were scared, and I forgot." Or she may have been half asleep and assumed I had returned normally. Parents are sometimes unsurprised by things children consider impossible because they know the missing context. I may have interpreted her calmness as proof that nothing unusual happened, when she simply understood the situation. Whatever the exact explanation, I do not believe a physical figure transported me from one house to another. The event has too many features of a recurring sleep experience: the repetition, the bedroom setting, the silhouette, the transformation of the room, the falling sensation, the false awakening, the impossible location change. All of those are common elements of vivid dreams and sleep transition hallucinations. The experience can be explained without a real dancer, void, or train. That does not make the memory unimportant. For a child, the difference between a hallucination and an external figure is meaningless. I saw him. I watched him dance. I felt the room disappear. I fell. Then I woke somewhere I did not expect. The fear and confusion were genuine. I have wondered why the figure was always male. Perhaps the broad shoulders or movement suggested a man. Maybe I had seen a male dancer in an old film or program. The silhouette may have worn a hat or suit in the original image, though I do not clearly remember either. Over time, I reduced him to some dude because there were no details beyond the body shape and dance. He did not speak. He did not come closer. He did not acknowledge me. He simply performed. That lack of interaction makes him feel more like a programmed dream image than a conscious presence. He followed the same routine every time. A real person would vary, respond, or make mistakes. The figure acted like the opening scene of a repeated film. Once it ended, the next scene began automatically. The train may have represented sleep itself. Trains carry people somewhere while they remain seated or lying still. A child may fall asleep and feel as though they have been transported through the night. The black train had no visible destination because the destination was morning. The dancer opened the route. The room fell away. The train carried me out of awareness. That is only an interpretation, but it fits the structure. It may also explain why I woke after reaching it. Perhaps the train was not taking me deeper into sleep. Perhaps it represented the sudden return to waking. The blue void was the transition, and the black train was the final image before consciousness came back. Dreams do not always follow one direction. Falling can happen while entering sleep or while waking from it. I may have experienced repeated false starts through the night, waking and sleeping several times while believing the whole sequence happened continuously. I no longer see the dancer. The routine stopped as I grew older. That is reassuring, like many childhood sleep phenomena. It disappeared as my brain developed and my sleeping habits changed. Perhaps I began closing the door. Maybe I no longer needed the hallway light. The visual conditions that triggered the silhouette were removed. I may also have stopped watching the doorway while waiting to fall asleep. Without the bright rectangle and expectation, the recurring image lost its stage. If the figure had been an external presence attached to me or the house, it might have continued appearing in other forms. Instead, it belonged to a specific age, room arrangement, and sleep state. That strongly suggests it came from my mind. But I understand why the memory still feels impossible. The experience did not announce itself as a dream. It began while I was awake. It used the real doorway. It followed me to another house. Then it seemed to return me home. Even now, saying it was a dream feels too small for something that contained a complete world and repeated so often. A better explanation may be that I was moving through the boundary between waking and sleep without noticing where one ended. The silhouette appeared while I still saw the room. The void began when the dream took control. The train belonged to deeper sleep. The awakening at home may have been false. The trip to my mother's room may have been real, dreamed, or a mixture of both. There may never be a way to separate every piece. That uncertainty is part of childhood memory. At 5 or 6, I did not record the dates or ask adults what happened the next morning. I only carried the images. A man made of shadow hopping into the lit doorway, his feet moving through the same routine the moment he stopped. The bedroom vanishing. The dark blue emptiness. The black train below. Then my eyes opening in a room I believed I had never fallen asleep in. Most likely, nothing entered the doorway. Nothing swallowed the room. Nothing carried me between houses. I experienced the recurring dream so closely connected to my real surroundings that I could not tell when I had crossed into it. The sleepover may have produced a false awakening, or someone may have brought me home while I was too tired to remember. Those are the explanations I trust now. But when I return to the memory, I still feel the same confusion. I am lying in my friend's room. He is already asleep. The hallway light shines through the open door. The silhouette hops into view as though he has followed me there. He dances. The room drops away. I fall through the blue void and reach the black train. Then I open my eyes in my own bedroom. Nothing explains the distance between those two places. I go to my mother's bed, expecting her to ask how I came home. She does not. She lets me climb beneath the covers as though I have been there all night. And somewhere between the friend's house, the train, and my mother's room, the real moment of waking disappears completely. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, there was a sound I sometimes heard at night just before something frightening happened. It sounded like my heartbeat beating inside my ear. The sound did not happen every night, but whenever it did, I knew what would come next. I would have the same dream. In the dream, 5 or 6 ghost-like creatures emerged from the long wall beside the staircase and began chasing me through the house. I do not remember clear faces or detailed bodies. They were more like pale figures or shapes that I understood to be dangerous. They seemed to come out from the wall itself, as if the surface opened and released them into the house. Once they appeared, I had to run. Sometimes I hid in different rooms. Other times I climbed into bed with my mom and pulled the duvet over my head. On at least one occasion, I hid behind the sofa in the living room. Eventually, I developed a rule. If they could not see me, I would be safe. It did not matter whether the hiding place was actually secure. A duvet, a sofa, or a dark corner was enough as long as I believed the creatures had lost sight of me. This happened at least twice a week for around a year. For a child that young, a year is an enormous amount of time. The dreams became part of my understanding of nighttime. I did not know when the sound would begin, but when I heard the beating inside my ear, I expected the creatures. Then, as I grew older, the episodes stopped. I began treating the whole experience as a recurring childhood nightmare. Children have vivid imaginations. They dream about monsters, ghosts, and things living inside walls. They wake frightened, run to their parents, and eventually grow out of it. That was the explanation I accepted. The heartbeat sound could have been normal, too. When you lie quietly with one ear pressed against the pillow, you can sometimes hear your own pulse. Blood moving through vessels near the ear can create a rhythmic thumping or rushing noise. At 3 or 4, I would not understand what it was. The sound may have frightened me, and that fear may have triggered the same nightmare each time. For years, I thought nothing more of it. Then one day, when I was an adult, curiosity got the better of me. I asked my mom whether I had ever climbed into her bed at night when I was very young. I expected her either not to remember or to say it happened once or twice, as it does with most children. Instead, she told me I did it all the time. According to her, I would suddenly get into her bed and hide beneath the covers. Once I was underneath, I refused to come out until morning. Her answer disturbed me. Until then, I had assumed the parts where I ran through the house and hid in my mom's bed belonged entirely to the dream. But if my mom remembered me physically entering her room and hiding, then at least part of what I remembered had happened while my body was moving through the real house. That raised an uncomfortable question. If I was not lying safely asleep through the entire experience, what exactly was happening? Was I awake? Was I sleepwalking? Did I see something in the house and run from it? Or was I still dreaming while moving through the rooms? The last explanation is probably the most likely. Young children can experience night terrors, confusional arousals, and sleepwalking. During these episodes, the brain is not fully awake, even though the body may sit up, walk, speak, cry, or hide. A child can move through a familiar house while still experiencing dream images. The real environment and the dream may overlap. A hallway becomes part of the nightmare. A wall becomes a doorway for figures. A parent's bedroom becomes the safe place the child must reach. From the child's point of view, the experience may feel completely real. They are not pretending. They may see or sense something pursuing them, even though no physical creature is present. The body runs because the sleeping brain believes there is danger. This would explain why I remembered being chased around the house rather than only dreaming of an imaginary location. My mind may have used the real layout of the home. I knew the staircase, the long wall, the living room, the sofa, and the route to my mom's bed. While partly asleep, I could move through those spaces and incorporate them into the nightmare. The ghost-like creatures may have appeared over the real walls and furniture in the same way a dream image can remain visible during waking. People sometimes wake and see a figure standing in their room for several seconds. Others hear voices, footsteps, or breathing. These experiences are called sleep-related hallucinations. They can occur as someone falls asleep or wakes. They are especially convincing because the person can see the real room at the same time. The creatures might not have existed in an ordinary dream separate from reality. I may have opened my eyes, looked at the staircase wall, and seen dream figures emerging from it. Then, I ran. That would also explain why I hid in real locations. I could have been physically behind the sofa or beneath my mom's duvet while still believing the creatures were searching for me. The rule that they could not harm me if they could not see me may have developed through repetition. Each episode ended after I hid. I was never caught. Eventually, my dreaming mind learned that covering myself or moving out of sight meant safety. A child hiding under a duvet often feels protected, even though the fabric offers no real physical barrier. The important thing is that the threat can no longer be seen. In childhood logic, if you cannot see the monster, perhaps the monster cannot see you either. The heartbeat sound may have been the beginning of the sleep episode. When the house became quiet and I lay with my ear against the pillow, I could hear the pulse in my ear. The rhythmic sound may have occurred as I entered a deeper stage of sleep or began partially waking. Because it appeared before the same frightening experience, my brain linked the two. The heartbeat became a warning. Once I noticed it, I expected the creatures, and that expectation could make the nightmare more likely. Fear itself may have increased my heart rate, making the sound louder. The sequence could reinforce itself. I hear my pulse. I remember the creatures. I become frightened. My heart beats faster. The sound grows stronger. The nightmare begins. Another possibility is that I was hearing pulsatile tinnitus, which is the perception of a rhythmic sound matching the heartbeat. In many cases, especially when lying down, this can come from normal blood flow near the ear. It may sound like thumping, whooshing, or a drumbeat. I was too young to describe it properly, so I understood it only as something happening inside my ear. There is no need for the sound itself to have been supernatural. It was probably a normal bodily sensation noticed in a silent room. The strange part was what followed. Night terrors are different from ordinary nightmares. During a nightmare, a person usually wakes fully and may remember a detailed story. During a night terror, a child may scream, run, stare, or appear terrified while remaining partly asleep. They may not respond normally to a parent and may have little memory in the morning. My experience does not match a classic night terror perfectly because I retained a repeating story involving the creatures. But sleep disorders can overlap. I may have had a nightmare that triggered sleepwalking. I may also have remembered only certain episodes while forgetting others completely. My mom's memory that I climbed into bed all the time suggests it may have happened more often than I consciously remember. Perhaps on some nights I reached her room without remembering the creatures. On other nights, I woke enough to preserve part of the experience. The episodes happening twice a week for a year would be consistent with a recurring sleep problem during childhood. Children's sleep patterns change as the brain develops. Stress, tiredness, fever, irregular sleep schedules, and family routines can increase sleepwalking or night terrors. Then, the child grows older. The nervous system matures, and the episodes fade. That is exactly what seems to have happened. I eventually stopped hearing the pulse or stopped associating it with danger. The figures no longer appeared. I no longer ran into my mom's room. If something paranormal had been active in the house, it might be expected to continue, affect other family members, or leave evidence beyond one young child's nighttime experiences. Instead, the pattern ended with age. That strongly supports a sleep-related explanation. Still, my mom's confirmation changes how the memory feels. A dream is usually understood as something that happens inside a sleeping mind while the body remains in bed. Knowing that I physically moved makes the experience more unsettling. My body was traveling through the house while my mind believed something was chasing me. The creatures were not real, but the running was. The hiding was. The fear was. I may have passed near stairs, furniture, and doors while not fully awake. That carries a real risk. Sleepwalking children can fall, leave the house, or injure themselves without understanding where they are. I was fortunate that my instinct was to go toward my mom rather than outside. Her bed became the safest endpoint of the episode. Once I reached her and hid under the duvet, I remained there until morning. My mom may not have realized I was still dreaming. From her perspective, I was a frightened child seeking comfort. She may have lifted the blanket, allowed me into the bed, and gone back to sleep. I apparently refused to come out from beneath the covers. That behavior makes sense if I still believed the figures were nearby. I did not need to explain them. I only needed to remain unseen. The living room memory is harder to place. I remember hiding behind the sofa. Was that part of a dream, or did I actually go downstairs and crouch there? My mom cannot confirm every location. It is possible the sofa scene happened entirely in sleep. It is also possible I really moved through the house before choosing the sofa as shelter. A child sleepwalking through a dark home may follow routes that seem logical within the dream, but make no sense when awake. Perhaps I tried to reach my mom, but believed the creatures blocked the stairs. Maybe I went downstairs to escape them. The house's layout may have shaped each version of the chase. The long wall beside the staircase was always the point where the creatures emerged. There may have been something visually unusual about that wall. Light from outside could cast moving shadows across it. A stair rail, coat, picture frame, or curtain might create several person-like forms. At night, especially while half awake, those shapes could become ghostly figures. If headlights from passing vehicles moved across the wall, the figures might seem to step out of it. There may have been family photographs or patterned wallpaper that became faces in the darkness. The brain is excellent at finding human forms in incomplete images. At 3 or 4, I would not have understood that the ghost-like creatures were shadows or patterns. The repeated location suggests a stable visual trigger. Every time I partly woke and looked toward that wall, the same objects were there. My brain interpreted them in the same frightening way. Once the nightmare began, the figures multiplied and chased me. The number, 5 or 6, may have come from repeated shadows along the staircase. Banister posts can resemble a row of narrow bodies. Clothing hanging nearby could create larger figures. As light shifted, they might appear to separate from the wall. This would explain why the creatures always emerged from the same place. The experience may have begun with something real, but harmless. A shadow, a sound, a view of the staircase. Then the dreaming brain built the chase around it. I have wondered whether the figures had any connection to television, books, or stories I had seen. At 3 or 4, children absorb images without remembering their source. A cartoon ghost, frightening mask, or scene in a film might return at night. The creatures did not need to resemble anything exactly. Dreams combine pieces of many memories into new forms. The wall could open because walls in cartoons and dreams do not follow real rules. The figures could float or change shape because I had no need to understand their bodies. They only had one function. They chased me. As an adult, the instinct is to ask what they were. But perhaps they were not meant to be identifiable. A young brain created a visual form for fear. The creatures were the feeling of being pursued. The pulse in my ear was the signal that fear was beginning. The rooms of the house became the landscape. My mom's duvet became safety. Seen that way, the experience has a complete internal logic. That does not make it less frightening to remember. In some ways, the sleepwalking explanation is more disturbing than an ordinary nightmare. When we dream, we assume the body is protected. But I may have been moving through a dark house while seeing things that were not there. I was navigating stairs and rooms according to a nightmare. If I saw the wall open, I may also have misjudged where real obstacles were. I could have fallen. I could have hidden somewhere dangerous. I could have tried to escape through a door. Instead, I repeatedly found my mum. Perhaps even in a half-awake state, part of my brain knew exactly where safety was. I also have to consider how memory from such a young age changes over time. I may not remember the episodes exactly as they occurred. The same dream repeated many times, so individual nights could have blended together. One night, I hid behind the sofa. Another night, I reached my mum's bed. A third episode may have taken place entirely in my bedroom. Over the years, these became one repeating sequence. My mum's confirmation may have strengthened certain parts of the memory. Once she said I used to hide under her duvet, I may have become more certain that every dream involved physically running there. The truth may be mixed. Some episodes were dreams. Some involved sleepwalking. Some may have been memories formed after waking in my mum's bed without knowing how I got there. A child who falls asleep in one room and wakes in another needs an explanation. The brain may create the story of being chased there. But I remember the creatures from before I asked my mum. They were not invented, only after her confirmation. The dream imagery was real to me. The question is, how much of the movement happened physically? The fact that my mum remembered me arriving does not mean the creatures were outside the dream. It means the boundary between sleeping and waking was not as clear as I believed. I may have been dreaming with my eyes open. I may have been physically hiding while mentally trapped in a nightmare. That is enough to explain the entire experience without anything supernatural pursuing me. The final question, what was chasing me, has a simple but unsettling answer. Probably nothing physical. My own sleeping brain was creating the figures and directing my body away from them. They did not need to exist in the house to make me run. Fear can activate the body, whether the danger is real or imagined. A nightmare can raise the heart rate, tighten muscles, and prepare someone to escape. In most people, the body remains largely still during dreaming. In a sleepwalking child, that protection may not work completely. The escape happens in the real world. The creatures may have been imaginary, but the chase was real because I acted it out. There is no shame in that. I was not crazy, and I was not pretending. Children commonly experience vivid sleep events. The brain at that age is still learning how to separate dreams, memories, shadows, and waking perception. The episode stopping as I grew older is reassuring. I do not have to conclude that something lived in the wall or followed me through the house. I also do not have to dismiss the experience by saying children imagine things. Something did happen. I heard the pulse. I saw or dreamed the figures. I ran or walked through the house. I hid under my mum's duvet and refused to emerge until morning. The physical behavior was real, even if the threat was not. That distinction respects both the memory and the likely explanation. Sometimes I try to imagine what my mum saw. It was the middle of the night. Her young child entered the bedroom without warning, climbed into the bed, pulled the covers completely overhead, and would not come out. Perhaps she asked, what was wrong? Maybe I did not answer. Maybe I told her something was following me, and she assumed it was an ordinary nightmare. She probably held me or allowed me to remain hidden until I fell into a calmer sleep. By morning, I may have acted normally. To her, it became one of the many strange habits children eventually outgrow. She had no reason to preserve every detail. For me, the experience remained because I remembered what I believed was outside the duvet. I can still picture the long wall along the staircase, the ghost-like shapes emerging from it, one after another, the sudden need to move, the knowledge that they were behind me, the desperate search for somewhere they could not see. Then the darkness beneath the duvet where I would remain completely still, If I could not see them, and they could not see me, I was safe. That rule worked every time. By morning, the creatures were gone. The house returned to normal. I grew older, and the dreams stopped. For years, I dismissed them as childhood imagination. Then, my mom confirmed that my body had really reached her room. That does not mean ghosts chased me. It means I was experiencing something more complicated than an ordinary dream. I was probably caught between sleep and waking, moving through the real house while nightmare figures occupied it. The sound in my ear was most likely my own pulse. The wall was only a wall. The creatures were images created by a frightened, half-asleep brain. But at 3 or 4 years old, I could not know any of that. All I knew was that the beating had started again. Soon the figures would come out of the staircase wall. I would have to run before they saw me. And somewhere in the real house, while the adults slept, a small child was moving from room to room, hiding from things that existed only for him, but felt real enough to follow him all the way into his mother's bed.
Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.